Hey everyone, good morning. It's a pleasure to welcome you to Yale's inaugural Responsible AI in Global Business Conference. I'm Jack, and together with my colleague Joseph, we proudly serve as the student co-chairs for this event.
Representing the Yale SOM AI Group and our co-host, the International Center for Finance, we're excited to welcome you to join us today for a multidisciplinary dialogue on AI development, adoption, and governance.
In November 2022, the launch of ChatGPT sparked the world's imagination, including ours here at the Yale School of Management SOM AI Group. We're amazed by the possibility this technology suggested and the momentum it unleashed. We saw both opportunity and the necessity for an AI-focused discussion here at Yale. However, after engaging with many of you, it became clear to us we needed to carve out a unique forum here, a space for conversation on AI that is not only about business, but also about society. It will be conversations that involve developers, investors, and shareholders, as well as customers, employees, citizens, and many other stakeholders that are impacted by AI and collectively shaping the future of AI. That's a conversation we're here to have today.
We're deeply grateful for the support and contributions from our partners within the Yale community. Your expertise and networks have been quite instrumental in bringing together thought leaders from the realms of business, academia, and policymaking to this conference.
We want to extend our special thanks to the Yale Program on Stakeholder Innovation and Management, the Chief Executive Leadership Institute at Yale School of Management, the Schmitz Program on Artificial Intelligence, Emerging Technologies, and National Power at the Yale Jackson School of Global Affairs, the Paul Tsai China Center at Yale Law School, the Digital Ethics Center at Yale University, and to the many other individuals who have offered invaluable support and guidance to us.
Before we proceed with our distinguished speakers, let's acknowledge the diverse group of participants gathered here. Among the 350 attendees, we're honored to welcome practitioners from over 80 companies and organizations across over 20 sectors. Our audience includes students, faculty, and alumni from Yale School of Management, the School of Global Affairs, the Law School, the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, and Yale College. Let me know if I'm still missing anyone. Okay. And additionally, we extend a warm welcome to our virtual attendees from 32 partner schools of the Global Network for Advanced Management, joining us from 30 countries and 14 time zones. Welcome, everyone, for this conversation on AI that will embrace a diverse mix of multi-stakeholder perspectives.
Now, let us introduce our opening speaker. We wanted to find someone who can give us a broad sense of how AI is being thought at the highest level of organizations, why and how AI is actually being developed and deployed across industries and geographies, someone who would take a multi-stakeholder approach. We're honored to welcome Rob Thomas. Rob is IBM's Senior Vice President of Software and Chief Commercial Officer. In his software role, he leads IBM's cloud, data, analytics, and AI portfolio. As Chief Commercial Officer, Rob is responsible for IBM's relationships with its clients and its partner ecosystem globally. Over his 20-year tenure, Rob has held many roles in IBM, from product engineering, microelectronics, to consulting. He was pivotal in IBM investing in data and analytics, and he championed IBM's participation in and support of open source and open innovation. Rob's published works include his book, The AI Ladder, Accelerate Your Journey to AI, and Big Data Revolution, What Farmers, Doctors, and Insurance Agents Can Teach Us About Patterns in Big Data. The Financial Times called the book interesting as a case study of the philosophical assumptions that underpin the growing obsession with data.
After Rob's opening remarks, he will have a discussion moderated by John Iwata, an executive fellow here at SOM and the practice leader of Yale's program on stakeholder innovation and management. John is also founding executive director of the Data and Trust Alliance. John's support has been instrumental in making this conference possible. Let's warmly welcome Rob and John for this enlightening discussion.
Good morning. How's everybody doing?
Morning. Morning.
It's an honor to be with this esteemed group. It's been a while since I've been on a college campus, and I think we have a great agenda planned for the entire day, so really excited about that. I saw this quote not too long ago, and it kind of struck me. Look at some of the words used. We're in an era where people are disturbed, confused, bewildered. There's excitement, there's feverish activity. There's a question of how are we going to apply our energy? And this quote really struck me. But then you look at, when did it come from? This was Woodrow Wilson, shortly before he became president. This quote was circa 1907, I believe. And what that told me is, while everybody's feeling a level of uncertainty, feeling excited about the opportunity around things like AI, the feelings we have, they actually are no different than they were 100 plus years ago. And to some extent, this is always the tension that's existed with technology. At the time that soon-to-be President Wilson made this comment, it was the rise of industrial capitalism. There were new people entering the workforce. And all of that will always create a level of uncertainty as technology is being applied to solve problems that maybe it had not before. But I share this with you because I think some of you may have even thought that this quote was written last week, because it is some of the same things that many feel already today. And what I'm going to share with you this morning is, I'd say, the paradox that I see that's occurring with businesses, governments, and academic institutions right now. And I'm also going to share some equations with you. I figured if I'm going to be at Yale, I might as well bring out some math equations. So I've got 3 equations to share with you. I don't think you'll need a spreadsheet for these. These are pretty straightforward. Probably won't even need AI for these, but to give you a sense for where I see these things growing. Let's see what's happening in the world right now. And these dynamics, I'll call them macro dynamics, are actually really important to inform what will happen in technology. We're in an age where populations are declining in nearly every country around the world. I think the forecast is there's only 5 countries that will see demographic growth in the next 20 to 30 years. So that's unusual. Productivity is kind of varying. Some places it's incredible in terms of rate and pace. And at IBM, we're investing a lot in the Middle East, countries like Indonesia, India. Productivity is off the charts. That's not the same everywhere in the world. We are exiting the era of zero interest rates. So while debt and capital is still available, it's dramatically more difficult than it was even a year ago. And all of this leads to, I'd say, a level of uneven GDP growth. And you can see some of the economies around the world that are driving productivity. They're also, by definition, getting accelerated GDP growth. So all of this represents opportunity. This brings me to the first equation. This is I'd call it an old rule of thumb in macro investing that says GDP growth comes from 3 things. You need population growth, you need productivity growth, and you need debt growth. And with those 3 items, any economy is able to grow. So let's talk about where do we sit for that today. Well, I talked about population growth. That's not going to grow. except for a handful of countries. So that's working against us in this equation. Then you go to debt growth. I established how that's going to get way more difficult. So what are the implications of this? This means the only way for businesses, governments to drive sustained growth is going to be around productivity. And that is different than any challenge we've ever faced in the last 100 plus years. So suddenly there is an imperative around productivity that everybody has to be thinking about. This is why I'm so excited about AI, because I believe without a doubt, AI presents the greatest opportunity as a catalyst for growth and productivity. And this is what brings us, though, to the paradox, because many people are concerned about implications of AI. Will this be disruptive to jobs? Will it change our work? How do we handle responsibility around AI? Can we trust it? But the paradox we face is that responsibility and disruption must coexist. And in this moment, there is no other option, which is why sometimes I get a little concerned when I talk to clients or governments around the world that think about, well, we think there's risk in AI, therefore we don't want to do anything. And my view is we don't have a choice. If your focus is growth, and growth is the one thing that's always brought improvements to the world, we have to deal with the paradox, which means we have to do AI in the right, responsible way while accepting the disruption that it may present. So that's the first equation. Think about the dynamics around growth and what it will require for us to continue to grow as a country here in the U.S., but all countries around the world and the global economy. That brings us to AI and the second equation. I would say AI success comes from 4 factors. One is foundation models, and I'll talk a bit about this. Second is data. And I would say while all of the hype and interest in the market today is around foundation models for good reason, I believe that the only sustainable competitive advantage will come from data. Because if every large public model is trained on the same data, we'll quickly get to the point that the only AI that will really be valuable for a business is the AI that's trained on your proprietary data. So we have foundation models, we have data. Next is governance. Last is use cases. These are the 4 elements of success in AI. I actually don't think you can be successful without considering all 4. You have to have models that are designed to solve business problems. You have to have data, as discussed. You need governance. Back to the paradox. Without governance, there is going to be risk inherent. And then lastly is use cases. So I want to dig into each of these a little bit. At IBM, we've built something called watsonx. This is a platform that's designed for business-to-business AI, not consumer AI. And you think about what are the elements then of generative AI beyond just the models. And I would describe it as the overall tech stack for generative AI. In the middle, you can see the core. You need an AI and data platform. This is a place to build models, train models, tune models. We are big believers in open source, so we provide the best of open source models, as well as IBM models that are tuned to specific domains. You need a way to manage data, and you need a way to provide governance, understanding models, how are models making decisions. That's what I mean by AI and data platform. As you move up the stack, it then includes things like software development kits. How do you make it easy for any company to leverage AI? You need to make it so that they can build AI into their own products, into their own systems. And then there's this category that I would call AI assistance, which is where you take an AI model and you tune it to solve a specific problem. I'll get into this a bit when I talk about use cases. But we think about things like customer service, which is a very repeatable problem, digital labor, just to name a couple. As you then go down the stack, it's about data services. How do you collect data, analyze data, organize data? I like to say there is no AI without IA, meaning information architecture. If you can't connect to all of your data sources, interpret those in a way that the data is trusted, has the right veracity, you'll never get the right outcomes with AI. And then lastly, you need to be able to run AI anywhere, what we would call hybrid cloud or hybrid deployments, from public clouds to private cloud to edge. Edge is probably the one part of deployment that is rarely talked about for AI, but I'm starting to see a lot of early work where inferencing is happening on edge devices. And so AI, by definition, will be hybrid in terms of where it runs. So what are the use cases? In a year and a half of doing this with generative AI, but I would say this even extends back to our experience with machine learning and deep learning, there are 3 use cases that I would say dominate 70% of this discussion today with businesses. First is digital labor. This is using AI to automate repetitive tasks. Now back to the disruption point and the paradox, that will certainly change jobs. I don't think anybody can deny that. But if you think about somebody that goes to the office every day and is doing the same task over and over again, that's not probably not the most fulfilling job. And so we see an opportunity to automate the repetitive work so that people can elevate their role in the workforce to do different tasks. But the big focuses for digital labor have largely been in what I would call the back office, HR, finance, procurement, supply chain operations, and we see clients around the world aggressively adopting automation of processes with digital labor. Next is customer experience. AI is a superpower for how companies can work with their customers. What used to be always a one-to-one interaction and a line to get your questions answered, we're now seeing 90% automation rates with a successful outcome using generative AI for customer service. We think this will revolutionize how clients can work or how companies can work with their clients to better support them. Third is around application development, IT operations, a more simple word, code. We're seeing 30 to 40% developer productivity by using AI to generate new code, generate documentation, doing test generation. In fact, with Watson X, we're now getting 85% code acceptance, meaning when Watson X makes a recommendation to a developer, 85% of the time they are accepting that code, which is incredible if you think about being at this for a year. And it gives me a lot of hope for where this could go. Lastly, in terms of use cases, are what I would call foundational elements. AI governance, basically looking at models that are running, understanding how they're performing, assessing drift in models, bias detection, explainability. Certainly with the large financial institutions that we work with around the world, this is of primary focus, mainly because of the regulatory environment, which is any company using AI to make decisions needs to be able to deliver a report to a regulator that says, this is how the decisions are being made. That's AI governance. And then lastly, data transformation, which I talked a bit about. It's kind of amazing, for all the work that's been done on data for the last 25 years, I'm actually not sure we've made that much progress. There was a report from IDC a couple years ago that said, still in Fortune 500, 90% of data is either unutilized, or underutilized. Think about that, 90%. Despite all the investments that have been made, data is still the most underutilized asset in companies around the world. This brings us to our third equation. So we talked about growth and what will be required for the world's economies and businesses to grow. Talked about the role that AI plays in that growth equation. The last equation is, how are we going to find the right balance? Said a different way, how do we navigate the paradox that I talked about at this time, at the front, around disruption coexisting with responsibility? Finding the balance comes down to three things. It's leadership, plus skills, plus open. And I think these are the three fundamental elements for how we navigate this paradox. What is leadership? Leadership is everybody in the room that will play significant roles in the companies of the world, in the academic institutions of the world, and the governments of the world, to lean in to the idea of navigating the paradox, which is to not be scared by the risks, to understand the risks, but to act anyway. And you can already see this happening in companies around the world as they start to differentiate on financial performance. The companies that are leaning in are delivering faster growth, are delivering better bottom line improvements. You can already start to see the disparity. So leadership, first and foremost, leadership does not mean irresponsibly running forward. Leadership means responsibly moving organizations forward. Second is skills, which I would say is related to leadership, which is every company, every institution is going to have to build a completely new set of skills to navigate growth in the next 5 to 10 to 20 years. This is core skills in computer science, data science, machine learning, generative AI, application development. The skills that businesses needed to grow 20 and 50 years ago are not the skills that will be needed to grow 20 and 50 years in the future. We've developed a program called Skills Build, which is about building these next generation skills globally. And we've put a particular focus on emerging economies of the world and underrepresented communities. We think part of our role in the world is to help build the curriculum and the training that's needed to do this. One example is in Indonesia. $1 trillion economy, very focused on technology. We've built an academy working with the government in Indonesia where over the next few years, I think we'll train upwards of 500,000 students in these next generation technologies. Last is open. Open has a few definitions. One is when AI models are making decisions, are we transparent about the data sources that were used to train those models? Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe to this date there's only one company in the world that has published the data sources used to train their models, and that's IBM. That's something that I'm very proud of. We did that about 6 months ago. And we think it's really important to lead by example. And step one is you have to publish the data sources that you're using to train models. The second aspect of open is embracing open source. If you think about the community that has done more for the world but gets no credit, it's the open source communities. This is where collaboration happens. This is where innovation happens. The irony of this, while some people get concerned when they hear the word open source, is open source software tends to be the most secure in the world as well, because you have a whole community of committers and contributors that are focused on that. We've launched something called the AI Alliance, working with Meta and a number of other companies, which is really our belief that there is a place for proprietary models, for sure, but there's an even bigger place for open source models in this next generation of AI. So I want to bring it back to where we started. Businesses and governments can utilize responsible AI for growth. I don't think this is a question. It is a paradox, but I'm supremely confident that both can coexist, and through that we can manage the disruption and avoid, I'd say, complacency that would come with trying to maintain the status quo. Lastly, responsible AI is responsible business. And this is probably the question I get the most is, how can you do that? Is this risky? And the reality is, this is good business, because business has always been about growth and working with the economies around the world and those governments. Part of our role in technology is to ensure that growth continues to happen for all people around the world. So to bring it back to the quote that started, bewildered, confused, feverish activity, can we navigate this? The short answer is yes. And we're not dealing with anything that people before us haven't dealt with. And over time, technology has always been a source of not only innovation, but prosperity for people around the world. So thank you all for taking the time to listen. John, I'd love to invite you up.
Thanks, Rob. We're going to open it up to the audience for your questions and observations in a moment. Let me start by starting with something you just said, which is we're not facing anything that people haven't before. You've been in the technology industry pretty much the entirety of the so-called digital transformation. So let's call it the internet and mobile and all that. And you no doubt observed so many leaders of organizations misread the internet, misread digital, and it was very costly. Lots of mistakes were made, a lot of people lost their jobs, companies were disrupted. It's taken a long time for enterprises to understand really what digital is. So with the benefit of all of that learning, some of it, shambolically, what would you say to leaders today so that it is not going to take 25 years to figure out, with so much at stake, what are some learnings that they can apply today when it comes to AI?
The place I always start is sometimes leaders and companies will view technology as a cost to be managed. And the better mindset is to think about what can technology do to fundamentally change your business. And I think what you're referring to, John, with some of the maybe mishaps in the past is if you think of it as a cost to be managed, you're probably going to end up on the wrong side of this. Why do I say that? So let's look at technology spend as a percentage of GDP. And I think this is roughly accurate. 25 years ago, technology was 5% of global GDP. In a period of about 20 years, is now closer to 15%. So this is no longer like a little thing. It's fundamental. And if I were to ask the room, do you believe technology as a percentage of GDP will be higher in 10 years or lower? My guess is it's going to be higher. So we've gone from 5% to 15% to who knows where it ends, but certainly not out of the realm of possibility to think if we get to 20, 25, 30%. So this is going to become a bigger and bigger force. So you can't resist the change. You have to accept the change. But then it becomes, who are the people that you surround yourself with? I do see deep technologists becoming part of the C-suite today in a way that wasn't the case 20 years ago. And you're going to see many of the speakers here later today which are emblematic of that. And I think that is an indication of the companies that are appropriately leaning in here to have the right type of decision makers at the top.
The paradox you described here is not only a challenge to the C-suite of organizations, but also to governments. And you take the internet era and regulation, it kind of played out over many, many, many years. What, if any, regulation is appropriate for social media and other things? Here's AI, and we have the EU AI Act, we have President Biden's executive order, we have all sorts of regimes considering regulation. Question, what is the relationship between what business does in the private sector, let's call it that, and the responsibilities of government when it comes to AI? I should say, by and large, businesses tend not to like regulation.
My belief is that, and IBM's belief is that regulation is appropriate for AI. But it's more about regulating the use versus the technology itself. What does that mean? In a business to consumer context where you're collecting personal information, that type of thing, that's what I mean by the use. That should be regulated. In a B2B context where a company is building AI using their own data, I'm not sure I see a big need for regulation on that. So I would say regulate the use versus the technology itself is a fundamental. I do think it's important to look at the different approaches that you see around the world. And I'll give an example that may surprise some people. The government that has impressed me the most in the last 5 years, I would say, is Japan. We're talking about a country that had seen 30 years of no growth. And about 5 years ago, the mindset in the government changed to, we want to be more aggressive on technology. We want to be more aggressive on growth, which is going to require productivity. We're going to navigate the paradox. They didn't use those words, but you can see it in all their actions. And look at the economy in Japan. Decisions made 5 years ago, now we're at an all-time high for the Nikkei. And the attitude in Japan and the business leaders there, I travel there a decent bit, is remarkable. It's unlike anything you've ever seen for those of us that have been through Japan in the years. So my point is, there is a right way to do this, but the government has to lean in. I'd say the other great example I see is in the Middle East. I'll be there actually next week, where I spend a lot of time, and you see the governments there very focused on building skills, applying technology, using it for growth, understanding that that will require some level of regulation, oversight, but being willing to navigate that. I think in the U.S., it's still to be determined. We talk a lot, but other countries may be creating better outcomes at the moment. So I'm optimistic. We'll figure it out in the U.S. because we always do. But you can definitely see a difference in what's happening around the world.
Thank you. Questions from the audience? Otherwise, I got about 82 more. Right here, please.
The discussion of your very own data and versus others' data and the difference between the tech and the data. I was trying to make an analogy to how that kind of made me feel like it's like, oh, don't look at the self-driving car, just look at the use of it. It just sort of made me nervous in the way that you could see. So I am curious about the technology, and I feel that you have to understand the technology to be prepared to use it safely. I also should say my name's Alexa Philo, and I'm an alum of the School of Management. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexa. Great question. I actually think both are critical, to be clear. The distinction I'm trying to drive is that we often lump everything together and say AI is good or AI is bad. And I think extremes are always bad, actually, because there's always a nuance in terms of how things are used and the nature of the technology. I do agree with your point that understanding how technology is applied, how it's making decisions is critical, but I think that's probably the second order. I think the first order is, what is the application? What are the implications of the application or use case? Because I think we would agree that self-driving cars probably entails more risk than automating a procurement process. And so my point is there's different levels of risk. I think that's probably the first order. I think second order, to your point, yes, we should understand the technology. To my point on regulated industries, when I was talking about, this is one of the primary focus I see from regulators right now, which is healthy, which is how are decisions being made with technology? Are humans in the loop? Which is another part of our philosophy in IBM as a company is we believe humans should be in the loop. And it's a pretty fundamental point, but not everybody sees it that way. But I do think that's critical, and I think that is an effective safeguard to go with your point around the actual usage of the technology.
Yes, hi. Thank you very much for great analysis. My name is Konstantin Pulukin, and I've been involved with digital transformation probably for 10 years, so I've seen it from very, very beginning on the way. My question to you, and I just want to see your observations. Your last point about finding the balance was skills and leadership. In digital transformation, my experience was the most difficult part was organizational change. It's basically, you can do technology, you can do whatever optimization, but if you don't have someone who drives reorganization, it doesn't work. With adoption of AI, what I observe currently, indeed all company strategy goes around cost. And there are a lot of representation from technology side that are accustomed to think from cost perspective. And the conversation that we're having typically around introducing technology. In order to make it in the growth, you need to involve business. So people who actually can formulate what growth is in very, very concrete terms. What is your observations right now for last, I don't know, 2-3 years? Is the balance is changing from the kind of consumption perspective or people who drive company strategy towards bringing more business people in the play, or is it still the same? What do you see? Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Konstantin. I am very optimistic about how this is changing from what I see, which is, again, like everything else, is not binary. It's a combination of technologists and business decision makers. And I think to your point, and when John kind of talked about mishaps in the past, the thing that mishaps tend to have in common is when it's one or the other. It's just a business team making decisions irrespective of technology, or it's just a technology team that are just excited about a new technology. I think, without a doubt, the greatest value is when those two come together. And I'm pretty encouraged about what I see in terms of how that's changed. I talked about more technologists in the C-suite. By definition, there's a lot of business people in the C-suite. So by adding that, you get the right level of diversity of thought. So I see pretty good progress there. I do think, also to your point, companies are very simple. They will always go after the easiest thing first. And with new technology like this, the easiest thing tends to be focused on cost. Automation, get more productivity quickly, more efficiency. But the end game always has to be growth, which is why I kind of started with that in the talk, which is ultimately the whole reason anybody should be interested in AI is that it's fundamental to the growth of the world economy, and therefore every company and government within it. So I think that's another balance point, but I encourage companies quickly to move towards growth. Get the benefits of productivity, but then think about what this means for growth.
Before we run out of time, Rob, we were talking about digital, now we're talking about AI. I have a feeling that within a few years we're going to be here talking about quantum. We're barely getting our heads wrapped around AI, and quantum seems to be coming. I know IBM and a few other entities are at the forefront of this. How should we think about AI and quantum? Should we just wait on that one because it's not ready, or should we begin to anticipate some things?
I don't know that anybody's smart enough to figure out the convergence of those two topics yet. Maybe a few people. but I don't think we should wait. To answer your question, quantum is here now. We have close to 50 quantum computers in the world running in production now. So it is very much here. Simple explanation of quantum. If you think about the history of computing, when you're building software, everything is binary. It's a 1 or a 0. So just imagine for a second a sphere, and there's a 1 at the top, there's a 0 at the bottom. All the logic that you develop is either a 1 or a 0. With quantum, on that sphere, you could be at any point on that entire sphere. There actually is no 1 or 0. The state can change at any point in time. So the applications that are available when you're not restricted by a 1 or a 0 is incredible. But it's not a replacement to classical computing per se, maybe some things, but this is leading us into new areas like drug discovery, material science, natural resources, places where simulation and a new kind of computing has always been needed. So I think it's very much here. It's hard to predict exactly. We're probably 3 to 5 years from more commercial applications, but 3 to 5 years comes really fast.
Indeed. Maybe we have time for another question from the audience. There, please. Oh, yeah, Claire, you have the microphone. Go ahead.
Oh, you gave it away. Don't give away the mic.
Okay. Mine's a super quick question. You mentioned Japan as an excellent example of a government that is showing great progress here. I know you're working with a lot of companies, and you mentioned a few are really making material gains. Can you share an example of a company that's bridged that gap from productivity to growth with AI?
I'll give you an example. It's a company I spent some time with this week, and some may recognize the name. Dun & Bradstreet has been a data company forever. And I'd say they spent many years kind of struggling through being just a data provider, because if you just deliver to other companies a data set, over time that kind of gets commoditized because they can't really get value or utility out of it. We've done a lot of work with them over the last 2.5 years, and I was with the whole management team and their CEO this week, and seeing a company like this that's embracing AI as a completely new way to deliver products, like, it was invigorating for me to see, because they're going to completely reinvent a company that's been around for, I think it's 30 plus years, and it's not going to happen over the next 10 years. It's going to happen over the next 10 to 20 months, because it's no longer about, we're going to give you a feed of data. We're able to develop generative AI applications in 3 to 4 weeks. You test those with clients, you get feedback, you get reaction. And so I think it's a good example that any company can be completely reinvented with AI. And credit to that management team for deciding we're going to be the disruptors of ourselves as opposed to waiting for somebody else to do it. That's one example that comes to mind.
We have time for a final question. Sir, microphone. There we go.
Hey, good morning, Rob. Matt Conweiser here, been in IT for 30 plus years. Open source is a very important topic. So my question is, Mistral recently kind of shook up the whole open source community by putting one of their newest models purely behind an Azure cloud environment. And they cited the AI Act from the EU as maybe one of the reasons why. So my question is, with the AI Alliance and the Bletchley Accord that are going international versus highly prescriptive, localized acts to regulate AI, where do you see the balance amongst governance versus open?
I think there's two camps in the world right now, maybe oversimplifying it. There's a camp that's focused on regulatory capture, which is why you see, I'd say, some of the proprietary providers spending a lot of time in Washington, because their view is, if we can get legislation enacted that ensures we are the victors, then we will be the victors. I don't think that's good for innovation. It's never worked in the history of the world, actually. So we are much more on the open source camp side. And Mistral's an incredible example. We just actually brought Mistral, or Mixtral specifically, into Watson X last week, where, think about the rate and pace of innovation. I believe the founder, left Google 9 months ago. They released it into open source. In IBM, we incorporated it into Watson X in 2 weeks. And so now companies around the world have access to that, either through working with IBM or through the open source community. Like, that shows you the value of open source in terms of innovation and speed and decision making. So we don't think anything should be done to compromise that. Now, there's a responsibility that comes with all of this, which is why our strategy being on integrating open source is we can do the right curation of models. We can apply HAP filters that, take out profanity and other bad things. So there's responsibility that comes with it, but you cannot beat the innovation that you get in open source. And so I admire what Meta's done, what Mistral's done. We've partnered with and invested in Hugging Face, which is the largest marketplace in the world for open source models. It's clear to me that open source is going to win, and proprietary data sets is going to win. That's what I see.
Rob, what a great way to frame our conference. Thank you for being here. Please join me in thanking Rob Thomas.
Thank you.
You see?